thank you all again for joining me in another episode of The Art of Comic Writing. I'm your host, Jorge Medina. That's George with a J. And today we are going to be talking to another very talented writer. We're going to be asking him questions about the art of comic writing. Let's talk a little bit about putting an idea down on paper or on your phone through voice notes is how I think most of us get what's in our heads out before the monotony of everyday life completely erases them. Right now, I'm talking to my 9-to-5 warriors who dream of making a career out of writing and do what they love so they never have to work a day in their lives. That's what I'm talking to. I'm not necessarily talking to my pro writers who do this for a living. I'm talking to those who want to make writing a living. This is how we stay in that creative mode, right? We just take these notes down, we write these notes down while we make the money that's going to pay the bills. So now that that simple idea is on your phone or say it's on a notepad, how do you go about developing that idea into a badass plot for a killer story or develop a character the audience will either love or hate because you want them to? Today, I have called upon a very talented writer, and we're going to discuss just that, character and plot development. I'm very excited about giving him my writing prompt later because I can't wait to see what he comes out with. So now, check this out. Cast out of the universe like cosmic Kane, he roams the planes of reality, jumping through the variegated permutations of the multiverse across the infinite dimensions of space and time. He writes everything from formal poetry to comic books, literary fiction to science fiction and fantasy, and almost everything in between. His Gothic collection, Into the Darkness Peering, was nominated for the Poe Visitor Award, and his poem, Nightwalkers, won first place in the inaugural Poet Like Poe contest. His work has appeared recently in Love Letter to Poe, Cowboy Jamboree, and Ahoy Comics. Doomed to travel and record but never find a home, he chronicles his adventures across social media and can be reached in most realities through his website. He wrote this, by the way. Please welcome A. Rubin.
Woo! How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Wow. Hey, that was amazing, dude. That was amazing. Thank you so much for that bio. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
All right. So for those who are joining us today, this is A. Rubin. We're going to be doing what we do every week, and that is talk about the art of comic writing. AA has a book coming out, which you guys will be able to hit the link in the show notes and get yourself a copy of. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk within the interview. But I'm going to ask him 5 questions like I normally do. We're going to have a conversation about writing, and we're going to have some fun. At the end, I'm going to give him a writing prompt, which he has no idea what it is yet. And we'll go from there. So are you ready?
I am ready.
How did you come up with the title for your book?
All right. So really it depends on the project. The book that you just mentioned is called The Awful Alphabet. It's an alphabet book for adults in the style of Edward Gorey or Neil Gaiman's alphabet book, The Dangerous Alphabet, but also like picture books for adults like Go the F to Sleep and All My Friends Are Dead. So, it just kind of works. It needs to be the something alphabet. It's alliterative. The first line of the poem is this alphabet's awful, like life is a miss. So contemplate A from above the abyss. So, you just take out that first thing as the awful alphabet. But that's not how it works for every project. Like I'm writing a novel now set in the Sherlock Holmes universe, and that's called The Case of the Walking Shadows. And the reason that it's called that because all the Sherlock Holmes stories have that framework, the case of whatever it is. The Walking Shadows is an allusion to Macbeth from the Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech. And if you read the book, it fits thematically with the book. It's actually, I use that speech as the epigraph on the book. And I will often do that. I'll often take a quote from another work of literature and use that as the title for the book. So the book that you mentioned in the introduction, Into That Darkness Peering, that's a quote from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, Deep Into That Darkness Peering, right? So people like that. I think it's a good way to do titles because it gives people something that they already know. When they see your book, it gives them an idea what the book is about. Another good exercise, and this one comes from Ray Bradbury, great title generator exercise and great writing prompt exercise. Ray Bradbury used to love to take walks for inspiration. He'd take a walk, he'd just go around, and then he'd come home and he'd list 15 nouns, but all of them had to start with the. And the only rule, it was free association, but they can't be related to each other. So it can't be like the house, the room, the window. No, it has to be things that are different from each other.
Right.
And you look at that list, the whatever, and in that list, you'll find a title, because a lot of things are titled.
See, the thing with what you're saying about the quotes is that even if you don't know the quote, it's such a good quote that it sounds like a great title.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, I don't know who hasn't heard of Edgar Allan Poe, hasn't read any of his poetry, but that title, even if you didn't know it came from a poem, just sounds great. So it's just a great sounding title, because I think that's so important, right? When you're trying to stand out, I guess, amongst a sea of other work, it's important to have that title be something that people remember or catches their attention. So let me ask you this: when you sit down to write, other than the title of the story, like we said, what is the first thing you write down?
When I sit down to write, and I am a pantster, if you know what that is. I do not write with outlines. I do not plan. I don't do anything. So the one thing that I need when I sit down to write, I need the narrator voice. Whether it's first person as the character voice, whether it's the third person voice. I mean, and it's, I'd say, a little different in comics than in some of the other things, because you don't have that internal dialogue, but still you're often starting with that dialogue. Dialogue is actually really important in comics, because it is the one thing from the script that you wrote that actually appears on the page, right? And you need your characters to sound like you have very little space, right? You have they say 25 words per panel, so something like that. And you need your characters to sound different from each other. You need them to sound like real people. So when I sit down to write, the thing that I need more than anything else is either the narrator's voice, if it's a prose thing, or the character's voice. I think voice is really important. Because you could tell more about a person, really, even from the way they speak, than the way they look. Right? You know where they're from. You know a little bit about their background, their education level. There's all sorts of things that you could tell just by the way they speak and just by the quirks in their dialogue.
Right.
As long as you're consistent with it throughout.
So you sit down with that in your mind already. You already have that in your head.
I spend hours and hours trying to get that voice correct in my head. And once I have it in my head, you're kind of just like channeling it through to your fingers, right? And you hear the person talking to you. You hear them talking, and they're telling you the story.
Have you written down notes prior to sitting down to write what you want to write down?
Usually I don't.
No.
Usually I don't. And I know that that's not for everyone. But for me, I find it to be an impediment. I want that. It's kind of like an impressionist painter who wants to capture, like, it's not, they don't do the most photorealistic thing, but they want to capture that feeling, that first image that you see. I find that when I'm doing dialogue or I'm doing something voicey, that if I write something down, then it's going to be stilted and it's going to be contrived. Whereas if I write in the voice, it's not. I want it to be natural. I'll fix it in editing. Like, I just want to get it down on the page, get it down authentically as someone's telling you the story.
How do you make sense of what you want to write for your story? Like, how do you do it if you're not writing these things down?
Yeah. And so usually either I have an initiating, you have the initiating incident in your head. You have something that you're starting with. I have the voice in my head, or I know the ending and I'm writing to the ending. Like, often I'll think of, it's either like the movie trailer thing, in a world where everything's the same, but this one thing is different. And then it's just logically, how would your character behave, or not, or illogically, if that's who it is. How would this person react to that situation?
As a reader, does it bother you when there is no logic to a character?
It doesn't. It depends on the character. Like, there are irrational characters. What bothers me is that when something doesn't fit the story, when something feels forced, or when something fits the trope too closely. I can't tell you how many times I've been reading or watching something, and my writer brain goes, "Oh, this is going to happen,"
Right.
And
Yeah.
you're not supposed to know that this is going to happen until, 20 pages from now or whatever, or like the next
Yeah.
issue or the next chapter, whatever it is, or the next episode. But you're like, kind of, you know, sometimes people do it well and they hide it and whatever. But there's a lot of times where I'm like, you know,
And that'll
and
bug
that
you.
has ruined
Right.
multiple shows and books and things like that for me.
Do you rely on your character to kind of walk you through the story rather than having an outline for the story
I don't,
and then the
yeah,
character
I
piece
don't
within you?
outline. I write,
No,
and I make decisions along with them. You know, I just, I don't know. I've always not been able to do that. In
that's
school, I
good,
was the
man.
one who wrote the outline after the essay, just because you had to hand it in. You
Yeah,
should see. You should see my notes are all arrows and circles.
right.
That I mean, now they call it mind mapping, but there wasn't a name for it back in the day. I do carry a notebook. I'll
Yeah.
jot down ideas so I don't forget them, because you get them at those time.
Yes.
I will write down different things, but often what I'm writing down are just the different attempts to get that voice to start the story. Like, I'll have the same first line and I'll be trying to really, they tell you not to rewrite as you're writing. I will rewrite that first line for hours and move things around and cross them out. And that has to be done in a notebook, because that's awkward to do on the computer. So yes, I mean, I do that kind of thing, but basically I don't, I let the ideas incubate. I'll have an idea, I'll jot it
Great.
down in my notebook, and then they'll stay in the back of my head. It's like a wine cellar. Like, they'll stay there until they're mature, until they're ready. And then once they're ready to be written, then I'll just write them. And I can flip through the notebook and find old ideas and be like, oh yeah, that was cool. That would work for this. And often it's because there's a themed call or whatever. And,
Right.
somebody will say, we're doing an anthology and we need stories about, you know,
Sure.
dragon unicorns from Mars or something. And you'd be like, oh, I
Yeah. Boom.
remember I had one
I
like that.
got one.
I had
Right.
one. So I flip through the notebook, try to find whatever it is
That's
that you
cool.
need. But usually I just keep them back there.
Right.
And when they're ready to be written, now I've always had a very good memory.
See, that
And
helps.
that's something
That
that I need.
helps.
If I wasn't, no, actually, that's not true, because my wife will tell you that's not true. I have a very good long-term memory. I
Hmm.
could tell you something that happened 20 years ago
Sure.
and tell it to you exactly what happened. I can't remember where I, parked my car or left my keys or anything like that happened 2 minutes ago. So,
Right.
you know, it works for me because that's how my messed up brain works.
That's how it
For
works.
somebody
True.
else, you know, somebody else who thinks differently, who has a different learning style, different writing style, you know,
Yeah.
work differently for them.
What is the most valuable piece of advice you've been given about writing?
You know what? I'm going to tell you the most valuable piece of advice I've been given in a context outside of writing
Okay.
that also works for writing,
Okay.
because I know you know this. I know this. I do martial arts, and I've done
Mhm.
martial arts since I was 8 years old. I've been in it for a long time. And one of the martial arts I study, one of the main ones I studied recently, is Jeet Kune Do, which is Bruce Lee's martial art. And Bruce Lee, if you are a creative person, if
Mm,
you want to do something, you should read all of Bruce Lee's essays.
yeah.
He was an amazing. He was a philosophy major. He had some really interesting ideas. And one of the things he had, which speaks to me, is he likes to break out of the patterns. He likes to break out of the conventions, like, the forms, like, kata or whatever. He didn't like that. He wanted things that were more alive and free flowing, which is kind of what I'm describing to you about the way that I write.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to
Yeah.
break out. I don't want essays. I don't want outlines. I don't want to be stilted, that kind of thing. So Bruce Lee said, what about any advice that you get in any walk of life? He said, absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and then take what you have and make it truly your own.
Hmm.
Take the rest and make it truly your own. And I think that applies to everything, because what works for me might not work for you. What works
True.
for you might not work for me. And anytime anyone tells you this is the way you have to do it, then don't believe them, because it is a way that you
Right.
can do it, right? If I said, burn your outlines, get the character voice in your head, that thing, it's like, no, because that might not work for you. The same way that, writing detailed character sheets and, doing an outline with a beginning, middle, and end and all that stuff, like that doesn't work for me, and we can both in the story in the end. For every, J.R.R. Tolkien, who invented fantasy, one reason why I want to be a writer, he was a planner of all planners. He'd write thousands of pages just to write, the Lord of the Rings is like minuscule compared to
the
what he
world
did as world building, right?
Right.
C.S. Lewis, who was his friend and fellow writer, who was a member of the same writing group, he would just sit down and write, he didn't care about all that stuff, It's it'd be kind of cool to have Father Christmas and the Lion and whatever. Just that'd be cool. I'm going to write that in. So and his work was heavily allegorical and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So so he did have a framework in mind. He was a professor and he had his literature and you need to do all that stuff, but they couldn't be more opposed for each other. One guy made Middle Earth and one guy made Narnia. There are different ways. So I would say, like, it's not like anything will work. Like that's not it. It's not like a free-for-all. But there are different paths. And if you could find a writer who's successful, who you write like follow that person. Find out what's successful for them. And maybe it's not, everything to one person. Maybe you take one thing from one person, one thing from another person, that kind of thing. So absorb what's useful. It's not going to start everything out, but, disregard what you find useless, what doesn't apply to you, and then take the different parts and make it your own.
That's great. That's great, dude. That is great advice. Because you're right. I talk to my friends all the time, and everybody has their own style, right? Their own style of writing, their own way of doing things. Like you said, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's what works for them.
Yeah.
For me to sit here and say, hey, like you need to do it this way because that's gonna work, man. Trust me. You need to map it out. You need to have a beginning, middle, and end. You need to do this. You need to do that. Would stifle you because you'd be like, no, that's not the way I work. Like I'm not gonna be able to do anything with that. We're gonna take a little break now. On the other side of the break, we're gonna talk a little bit about developing some of these plots and some of these characters. Go deeper into that. So we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Yeah. If I die tomorrow, I hope you hear these words. I ain't here to flip no birds or sip no serve. Hope the future generations could get this urge. Stay woke, youngin', and avenge these nerds.
And we are back with A.A. Rubin, and we're talking the art of comic writing, but not just that. We're talking about writing in general. A.A. does a lot of, prose, poetry, comics as well, obviously. But I guess my question for you at this portion of the show is, how do you develop your plot and your characters? I know we were talking about the voice of the characters, right? But how do you develop that? What are some of the tricks, tips that you use to develop these characters, to make them real, to find that voice that you were talking about?
Okay, so for me is the idea is you put them into the situations. You have these situations which make your story. You have your character, and something happens to the character, right? Or some situation happens. So something happens in the world that's different. As your character reacts to these, and that's why as they react to it, you learn more about it and they learn more about themselves. At least in the way that I'm doing it. One of the, Panster, actually, you had plotter and Panster was actually originally like a derogatory term, like you write by the seat of your pants. You write by the seat of your pants, there's different things for it. I said an architect and a gardener, which I've heard Neil Gaiman say. But one of the ways they talk about it is discovery writing. And you're discovering your character and you're discovering your story as you go.
Right.
So yeah, you got your person or whoever it is, whatever it is, doesn't have to be a person, and they go along and something happens to them. And you don't know how to react. They're going to react to it because you haven't outlined it out. You know how you would react to it. Now you find out how they react to it. And every situation, just like in life, makes you a different person, makes you a deeper person, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So in terms of character development, that's really the way that I kind of do it. And then, you know, sometimes, you're going to want to come back in, write scenes after you're done, right? When you do it this way, like in the editing process, like I had to add a subplot, like those types of things.
Yeah.
But the story, if you have a good story, reveals the character. That's what it's there for, right? That's what a good story is. It will reveal the character, right? Oedipus doesn't do what he does because he's a tragic hero and he makes that mistake. It's not a mistake. Oedipus will always make that mistake because he's Oedipus, right? No matter what, Peter Parker's still a nerd.
Yeah.
Like, he's trying not. He has all these powers. He's still the nerdy kid in high school. Iron Man has a drinking problem. Like, he does. He has a narcissist. But he is, right? And he will do things because that's who he is. He can't do the other thing because even though he has free will, his character will cause him, or her character, in case of female character, their character will cause them to act in a certain way when presented with a certain situation because that's who they are.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it tragic, or that's what makes it funny, or whatever way you're going to do it.
Wow.
So the trick then is to find the situations that are going to reveal the characters, to put them in. And you can either do that. I like trope. People don't like to use tropes. I like to use tropes because you can reverse the trope. Everything's the same until it's not. And then you get a twist that way. You get a surprise that way. Or, you put them in, but your story will be different. Like, you don't need, right? There's other ways to structure a story. You could do a beginning, middle, and end. And there's nothing wrong with the 3-act structure.
Right.
Like, 3-act structure is great. Many, many great stories. Most of the stories now going to be the 3-act structure. You could do a 2-act structure. Many great plays, like you go to a Broadway, have 2 acts at a time. And the great thing about a 2-act structure is that you can make parallel incidents to show how the character has changed. Everything in the first act, you go up, do events 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the first act, and then you do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the audience or the reader can see how the character reacts differently after the change. After, if you're doing the hero's journey, it's the voyage to the underworld, right? There's no reason you have to chop that up into 3. You can make it 2, which is really nice, because what problem does everyone have writing? Everyone's like, oh, I can write the beginning and I can write the end.
The middle I have the problem with.
Right. Get rid of it. Just have the 2 acts. You could write 5. Shakespeare wrote a 5 acts. You have a 4-issue miniseries. That's common. You could do 4 acts and do it. If you did the parallel thing, you could have 2 and 2. There's different ways. There's different ways to do it. So the thing is, the plot is, you need something interesting to happen. And that. But there are different ways of having that. I always think of, like, I was never a club guy. I like hanging out in dive bars. I like that type of thing. And, there's always the old guy at the end of the bar. And you think of the old guy at the end of the bar, or, the old guy in the barbershop or whatever, or the, listening to your grandfather's war stories or whatever. And they're not following any 3-act structure. But you know what? If they're a good storyteller, and you know who the good storytellers are, they're not thinking about it as a writer, thinking about it as a storyteller. And there are ways. Pay attention to how that person tells their story. Pay attention. The old guy at the end of the bar, or the old guy in the barbershop, who's there in the barber, they listen to all this stuff. And, they'll say some ridiculous things. And, like, you hear a whole bunch. Barbershop is a great, great place just to hang out as a writer, because you will hear all sorts of nonsense in there. You can use it. Go. I used to go. I used to go by myself, sit in the back of the bar, sit at the end, and just, watch the game or whatever, and just listen and, like, write things down that people say, but listen to how these, people tell stories when they're a little drunk, or when they, or when they're a little bit older, they don't care anymore. And they're like, and they're really good storytellers and they hold an audience.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
and that's part of the way that, and through the retelling, through telling it
Yeah.
and telling it again, because they're all the same stories, right? They
Yeah.
each got 2 or 3 other stories, but pay attention to how that works.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Where they
small,
emphasize certain
yeah,
things, where,
right.
how they tell that story.
Where they
Absolutely.
exaggerate,
Where
where
they
they
exaggerate.
pause, what they skip over time-wise.
Mm-hmm.
If you stay too close to the forms, 3 act structure, 21 point, whatever, that thing, you'll often lose those things that make your character, because then they're not acting like real people. They're acting like characters in a story.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Good point,
you,
man. Good
you,
point.
you know, character, the book had the way truth is stranger than fiction. The reason why is because real people aren't bound by a plot like that. They're not. And yes, the characters are to some degree, but not as much as everybody thinks they are. They have to be free to act the way they would act in a real, real
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, you're putting them in situations and then you're making them react to the situations, which will eventually move the plot forward
Yeah.
because they're in those situations. Similar to
Right.
like what we go through in life, right?
Yeah.
You go to work, whatever happened, incident happens that propels that causes something else to happen and then causes something else to happen. And that's life. And so when art imitates life, it's a lot more interesting, I think.
Sometimes it's the digressions that make things interesting. Not everything has to be there, just to advance something. Sometimes things show you, they show you who someone is.
Yeah.
You go in too straight a line, you end up with the last season of Game of Thrones. You know where it ended. You're just barreling ahead to get there.
Right, right.
There's other stuff going on in that world. And
True.
that's what we want to see.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that insight because it's something that I never really thought about until we had this conversation. So I really appreciate that. Now, Ari, I'm going to ask you one more question. It's the bonus question. Okay.
Right.
And that bonus question is, what's your favorite YouTube channel and why is it Get Your Meds?
Oh, well, obviously that, I love talking to George. We love talking about writing. And, it's great to have different writers on and get different perspectives. One of the thing is, like, you'll watch me and you might say, oh, well, no, I'm an outliner or a thing. And then you can watch someone next week, and, it could be someone completely different. Like, oh, yeah, I'm a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I think about things also, though, because of my background and because of my education, because I was an English teacher, that I know stories and I know structure, and I'm talking about Aristotle and that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of other ways to do it. So you want to, again, listen to as many writers as possible, listen to different perspectives, and that's a great thing about your channel, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. You're absolutely right, man. And to your point, it's almost like when we talked about it a little earlier, to use a cliche, right? Know the rules before you can break them. Know the rules. Learn the rules. So you're not saying don't learn anything.
Right.
You're not saying do it.
No.
Like you said, your way. You're saying know what you're getting into, but then kind of like.
I mean, because like in order to write like this, in order to be a pantster, I need to know story and I need to know plot structures. And like I could do a tragedy, like, or I could do a comedy, I could do a noir, I could do a fantasy, a hero's quest, whatever, various kinds of side, because I know those stories. And part of that was because I worked as an English teacher for a long time, and I had to learn all of them, and I had to teach people about how those work. And my background allows me to do that, whereas somebody else might have different advantages, and I won't be able to do what they do because I don't have that. I don't have that either, right? I might not have the same, the same attributes, and I might not have the same, personality or the same approach. And it doesn't mean that you can't admire their work, but it doesn't mean I can't get something from them. Like you could be able to get. I always say, like, if I go to a seminar or if I listen to a podcast, I listen to a writer, they're going to talk about however many things they talk about over the thing. If I get one thing out of that, if I get one thing out of the hour, that's a good podcast.
That's it.
If I get two things, That's a great panel. Like if I go to a panel writing, I'm listening to a bunch of people talk about writing comics or whatever. If I could take home 2 things, that's great. And if I could take home 1 or 2 things from everyone, then that's what you need. And then you take all of them, you put them together, and you say this works, this doesn't, that kind of thing. But it's important, I'm going to tell you how I do it. You're going to tell me how you do it. But you also want to listen to how other people, like, that's the thing people misunderstand about that Bruce Lee quote. They're like, oh, just do whatever you want. That's not it. That's not it. Because you need to, it's not even disregard the part that confused with the disregard the useless part. Because you don't know what's useless, especially when you're starting out. You keep it there. And you got to keep it for a while before you decide that's not for me, right? So you want to take the different parts and make it your own, but you need different parts to take. So that's one of the the great things about talking to different writers and seeing different writers talk about their process.
I agree 100%. I'm going to give you one final thing here. Let's see, the writing prompt, right? The writing prompt for tonight. And that's going to be, again, just so everybody knows, the writing prompt. Sit down 15 minutes in a room, on a train, whatever, doesn't matter. And just write, whether it's a short story, whether it's a scene in a comic, a poem, whatever you want to write, 15 minutes using this prompt. Unrecognizable footprints in the woods. Unrecognizable footprints in the woods. How do they get there? Why they're there? Whose footprints are they? What happened? Think about that. Sit down, 15 minutes, write it, and see what you come up with. But yeah, no. Listen, Ari, thank you so much for coming on. You've been incredible, man. I appreciate you. We definitely have to get together, shoot some hoops or something. I know you do that, and I love basketball, so we should do that. But thank you so much for coming on, man, and we'll talk very soon.
Hey, thank you, George. It's been a pleasure having on you. Great host.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you. And that, everyone, was A.A. Rubin. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us. A man full of knowledge. There was so much in that interview. I hope you guys walked away with some good stuff in there. I know I did. I'm looking at the way I go about my storytelling a little different since I started doing this show. And it's very important that we take into consideration that not everything works for everybody. So the way AA does his things may not work for you. The way, I've had a few writers on the show, the way they do their thing may not work for you. So, see what works. And that was great advice that he gave. He said, find someone that writes the way you like to write and learn from that writer. See how that writer became so successful in what they do. So check the show notes for his information. Check it out, hit the link, and go check out more work from A.A. Rubin. Very, very, very knowledgeable writer. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. Give me a like, share this thing, hit the notify me bell, because the notify me is going to let you know when I go and post these things up. I do them weekly. So you will be able to find them on my channel, but make sure you subscribe and make sure you hit the notify button. Also share it. Share it out. That's huge. That's big. Don't forget that at the end, I gave them a writing prompt, and I want you guys to be involved. If you're a writer and you're stuck, you don't know what to write, use this. The writing prompt is unrecognizable footprints in the woods. Unrecognizable footprints in the woods. Why are they there? Whose footprints are they? Think about it. Throw it down. If you do want to share it with me, my email is going to be in the show notes as well. My website is on there also. If you want to pick up some t-shirts, if you want to pick up some books, some of the stuff that I'm doing, getyourmedzinfo is on there. My email address is down there, and all of my links are down there. My social media. Follow me all over the place. Thank you so much for joining me. And don't forget, next week there will be another show. And also, don't forget, keep writing. Peace.